I need to stop using my own things. First element is that he points out there's some kind of traditionalism in, oh, only now you start recording. That's nice. There's some traditionalism in the sense that, and this is very subtle of him to point this out, a lot of fascists, they have some fascination with very old myths, things from like 1,000 years ago, and like secrets of the ancient Egyptians, and what Shiva was really trying to warn us about. And they like mythology. They like these, they like archaeology and like this mummies and this kind of stuff. And they think there's some kind of meaning behind it. There's some kind of eternal truth of, or the time from the Druids or the Incas or whatever, something we have to interpret from the past. They like watching Discovery Channel, fascists. Everyone I know does. And there is this element that the truth is already there, basically. It's just in some hidden past. We don't need science. We need to reinterpret tradition. This is a very low-key element of it. You have anti-rationalists, this kind of reaction against modernity and its values of freedom and equality. He points out, or he thinks that Ur-fascism is anti-intellectual. There's a hate for reflection, and a general hate for the intellectual class. And that intellectual, you see this often with fascists, that the intellectual is a slur, is an insult. And just being cultured in general could be seen as a bad thing. With Trump, you can see this quite clearly, how he makes fun of authors, etc. That's racist, he points out, and that's xenophobic. That's clear. That appeals to the lower middle class. This is interesting, because typically you would associate fascism with more lower class appeal, but it's actually true if you zoom out that who would vote for fascists or who votes for far-right parties is working class, but it's especially lower middle class. And actually you see this at lower middle class in general is the most right-wing faction besides the elite in any poll that I've ever seen. It's the lower middle class that votes the most right. You can see this. You see this right now with electoral polls. Right now we'll have a clear majority with lower educated people. We have a majority with highly educated people, and it goes like just secondary. That's where it's lowest. People who like have an education but are not actually trained to think, like an education for the labor market but not reflexive, they're going to be most susceptible to more right-wing ideology. The ones who are not educated, who don't really interpret the world, less, and the ones who are more educated also less. So this frustration on lower middle class and the shopkeeper, right, or your local independent person, they're the ones who will flock to this most, he says. They're prone to conspiracy theories, which I think is very clear with fascism, right? There's always some outside conspiracy. The Chinese are always up to something, or the Russians, or the Venezuelans, right? The Venezuelans, they rigged the elections in the United States, if you don't know yet. They're also behind AMLO. Actually, AMLO is Chavez, and AMLO killed 400,000 people to hide this, if you didn't know. Oh, and I once had a plumber here who had this amazing story that Cuba was actually financing the Mexican government. And he had evidence of it too. But then you have this obsession with the opponent, right, the enemy. It's anti-pacifist, or at least aggressive. They have the hate for the weak. It's a classic fascist argument, or element. A cult of heroism and encouraging people to act like heroes and to act on their own and to be, shoot up a black church or something. Sexism, redefinition of the real people in the sense that fashion will be populist, but not for everyone. It will talk about when they say the real people, they really mean a majority, like white people in the United States, right? If politics is not the interest of white people, then you would say they're undemocratic because they don't represent the people, even if they have an actual majority, but that's of people who are not really the people, so it doesn't count, right? Or we, the good Mexicans, don't have a majority. Government has a majority, but they're of poor people, so it doesn't count because the real people are not represented. And a simplification of language, he adds quite originally, which I don't know how that applies to Hitler and Mussolini. It applies to Trump. Climate change is bad, right? It's just bad, mean. Like he had a very simple insults for things that he would just would say maybe. Again, this is not my list, but this it can make you see what this kind of non-historical fascism would be, right? In his definition. Any opinions on this before I bulldozer on? What do you think? Do you think fascism can be seen as something transhistorical? Do you think we can call things neo-fascist? Or do you think that is blasphemy? That's not serious. You should keep fascism for Hitler.
No, I think that it's a political tendency, because like that happens with other ideologies. Like I know that's not the best example, but for example, like communism in theory and communism in real life. And obviously, communism has changed throughout the time, and well, fascism, why not? Should change either.
Okay.
Or like liberalism and neoliberalism. Like it's maybe
Mm-hmm.
not the best ideology for some, but if it's still there, it's because people are feeling connected with these ideas.
Okay. Good.
Doctor,
Anyone?
question.
Yes?
Like,
Okay.
are there like when we talk about fascism, should we also see that there are some politics applied? Like this is a fascist policy, or it is connected to neoliberalism or to liberalism policies, or like how does it works? Because you have socialist policies. What happened
Mm-hmm.
this type of policies?
Well, next time I want to talk about nationalist policies with you. They would fall in the bigger nationalist family, right? They did the same thing, just more of it. So next time I want to talk a bit about like how you can separate it, like just nationalist policies, regardless of who is the power. I want to talk about that next time. So I hope to answer your question a bit more in full there.
Okay, I'll wait.
Yeah, you're ahead of the wave. I'm sorry. I can only do so much. Um, Now another debate that I'll ask your opinion on later too is this is I'm less neutral here. Um, One debate in definition of fascism and neo-fascism is if it's a right or a left-wing thing, which is a bit of a ridiculous question. But again, you have people trying to associate with both capitalism and communism. You have certain neoliberal theorists, very influential ones, like von Mises, who's an early neoliberal, and Hayek, one of the main authors in neoliberalism. In their books, especially Hayek, and they describe basically fascism as a variant of socialism, a variant of just like national socialism of Hitler, right? You would try to mix that in with the general left, and they do this by focusing on the few elements they have in common, such as they both regulate property. Although you have capitalism, you don't really have full freedom because the government will, for example, if you're in a war, the government will commission you to build tanks, right? And you would have built fridges, but there's no time for that. You have to build tanks now. So, or they would take the property from the Jews. So they're not. they're not 100% respecting property rights. The socialists don't either. They have both had healthcare for very different reasons, but they both had, some socialist policies, and they both had a big state. In the fascist case, there's mainly the army, but still, right? So that's the kind of analogy you try to draw, and you try to portray fascism as some variant of populism, and thus as a variant of the left. And they've been quite successful in at least in America in pushing this idea. Then on the other hand, you have the communists, people like Trotsky or Bertolt Brecht. We saw Trotsky before. Brecht is a playwright and a theorist from Germany. They again, and Lenin too, they define fascism as a variant of capitalism, right? For them, fascism is the ultimate stage of capitalism. It's capitalism when it's cornered. When capitalism is in the corner, it's on its back foot, it will turn totalitarian. It will turn countries against countries. It will try to split the working class through war to avoid the revolution. So, and this is how these countries experienced it, because the fascists were people who came from the outside invading communist countries, right? So they're clearly some kind of capitalist aggression against the united working class. So from their perspective, that's what fascism is. Fascism is ultimate capitalism. It's the most, I think in Brecht's definition, is the most naked and brutal form of class dominance without the pretense of liberalism, right? It's capitalism minus the facade of liberalism. That's not the way you could see it, right? I personally think this is not really a debate. It's only a debate because people wrote those books. I don't think that the first position is sustainable, because a very easy way to know what side people on is to look at their opponents, right? This I can argue in my essay, which I hope you've read. If you want to know if Morena is on the left, look at who the right is against. They're not like the Communist Party is el peligro para Mexico, right? That's not who the industrials are rallying against. Same with fascists. Fascists have been fighting forever a war against socialism. Any fascist movement ever spoke out against communism and tried to repress socialism, right? Trump was hating socialism. Bolsonaro came by mainly making fun of socialism, right? The Workers' Party. Mussolini did, like, all of them did this, and any far-right party that I know has beef with the socialists. They're always opposites. They're against each other in every discussion. So to say that somehow the left is extremely curious, because both sides are not aware of this. If this is true, both the fascists and the socialists are not aware that they're somehow the same, because they've always fought each other. A quote here from, I think, quite a good source, a guy who wrote one of the standard works of the short introduction series of Oxford University on fascism, Passmore. He writes, fascism, this is his definition, is a set of ideologies and practices that seeks to place a nation, defined in exclusive biological, cultural, or historical terms, above all other sources of loyalty, and to create a mobilized national community. Fascist nationalism is reactionary in that it entails an implicable hostility towards socialism and feminism, for they are seen as prioritizing class or gender rather than nation. This is why the fascist movement is on the extreme right. Fascism is also a movement on the radical right, because the defeat of socialism and feminism and the creation of a mobilized nation are held to depend upon the advent to power of a new elite acting in the name of the people, headed by a charismatic leader and embodied in a mass military party. Fascists are pushed towards conservatism by common hatred of socialism and feminism, but are prepared to override conservative interests, family, property, religion, the universities. I don't know that the universities were conservative, but anyway, the civil service, where the interests of nations are considered to require it. Fascist radicalism also derives from a desire to, I don't know that word, damn it, I'm such a peasant, assuage, I must have misspelled it. I think it means assure. Discontent. Yeah, I miswrote that. It's me. By accepting specific demands of the labor and women's movements, so long as these demands accord with national priority. Fascists seek to ensure the harmonization of workers' and women's interests with those of the nation by mobilizing them within special sections of the party or within a corporate system. Access to these organizational benefits they confer upon members depends on individual national, political, and/or racial characteristics. All aspects of fascist policy are suffused with ultranationalism. Thus, it is more of a right-wing ideology, and saying that's on the left ignores that it has always reacted against the left. Now, that's the position I'm taking in this, but you're free to argue the opposite. Go! You have 1 minute. No, I'm joking. But does any of you have a strong position on this? Do you think that fascism is a variant of communism? That they're really the same thing? We're just blinded by Marxist teachers from seeing the truth.
I don't think so.
Ah, damn. Hugo, maybe you. No.
I do not agree with fascist political way to manage power.
Okay, I had a hard time understand the last part.
I was saying that I do not agree with the way fascist government handle power.
Okay. So then the last thing I want to talk about, this rather quickly, and a bit shallow, this is when I ran out of time, is to talk about the comeback of the far. I'm sorry, Sophia, this is how it is. Man. I only have so many hours to prepare class. I'll talk a bit about the far right and how this is very relevant today. You already know, but it made this comeback. And since I'm a little bit older than you, I can talk a bit about how this happened and where it comes from. So fascism, of course, peaked with Hitler and Emperor Hirohito and Mussolini, but it didn't die with them. It largely died after World War II. It was defeated, that's true. And openly calling yourself fascist was not a good idea after that, and nobody really did it. But that didn't mean that the practice of it was fully dead. First of all, Nazism especially is a form of colonialism, right? It's about conquering other peoples. It's also not that different from colonialism, by the way, if you want to see fascism as some trans-historical thing. And colonialism still existed, right? So people couldn't fully do away with all elements. You couldn't fully argue against the racism of fascism, because then you'd have to give up your own colonies, right? That would take another 20 years from then. So they couldn't fully root out this idea. They could root out the word, but it would be too hypocritical to reject all elements of fascism for many countries, because they still were repressing other races. And some regimes that were fascist during World War II, that stopped calling themselves fascist, but they were on that side, survived. Francisco Franco in Spain, lasted till 75 and only stopped because he died. If he never died, this regime might have lasted longer. And in Portugal, Salazar, he died earlier, but his successors lasted until 74. So these were fascist regimes in Europe. They were also dictatorships, like they ticked most boxes. They existed until the 70s. And in the world in general, if you talk about racist dictatorships, in Africa, a few survived. I forgot the name, but there's another one besides South Africa. But anyway, I forgot the name, so I can't tell you. But it existed. No, I won't think of it now. But South Africa had apartheid, had separation between races, was very nationalist, had explicit inside-outside things, and was sort of a dictatorship, at least to the majority of the population. And that lasted till 94, right? So fascist countries really only died in the 90s. But by that time, fascism as a theory, so this is the practice, but the theory was already coming back. It was dead in Europe for a good 20 to 30 years, when, you know, the people who fought the war were still there in power. They were not very happy about, you know, people talking about fascism. But when that memory started to fade in the 70s, when the new generation that was not born in the war but was turning 30, you had a comeback of this. Also, non-coincidentally, with the breakdown of socialism. Right, this is when neoliberalism started, when the working class started to get abandoned. Part of that working class did not come back to the socialists, but they went to the far right. It's the kind of the history of it. It comes together with neoliberalism, or it's the effects of it. And that came back in Europe first, of these parties that were not called fascist, but they were very nationalist, they were xenophobic, they were anti-immigrant, and they were populist, and usually conservative, which takes up a bunch of characteristics already, right, of Umberto Eco. Which were they? The most famous one and the original one was the Front National in France. Have you ever heard of this party? Well, now you did.
No.
No.
Front National is the original far right. Well, Hitler was the original far right, but of the new generation. They're the ones who brought it back. This is the party of Jean-Marie Le Pen. And now his daughter, Le Pen, is the new leader of it. It's a monarchy. They started in 74, and they started winning, not winning, but they started growing. And in 2002, France is a two-tier system of elections, like 2 rounds. So, like in Mexico, it would have been first round, and then it would only be Morena versus the PAN, right? Which Morena would still have won because they had a majority anyway. But, you know, there would be that type of system, like you have in Bolivia, for example. So in France, in 2002, they got second place. So they were in the runoff, which was scary, right? You had a 1 in 2 chance of them being there. And so were they lost elections. Lost elections, they were also number 2. And they came very close to beating Macron. So they're real chance. And if they would win, there would be an earth change. There would be the earth shift in European politics. If they win next elections, France would turn fascist. That would be that. Just think of it historically, right? They're the country that suffered, or one of the countries that suffered most from them. If they would turn this, that would be massive. And they have a good chance of winning. Front National is a very strong party. Then in Belgium, I mentioned Belgium because we're also part of this generation, and Belgium is quite xenophobic. In Belgium, you had a party called Vlaams Blok. Now that means Flemish Bloc, now called Vlaams Belang, which means Flemish interest. Started late 70s, split off from the normal nationalist party. You already had a nationalist party called the, let me translate this, the People's Union. They're all right, but then they had a split off. People's Union was actually a left nationalist party, but they split with the right nationalists getting off. And they started winning elections since the 90s. Not winning with majorities, but growing. And I think last election, they had 25% of the vote in Flanders, because they're a regionalist party. They don't exist in the South. The South has no far right. Barely a right. They only have a liberal party, and that's it. But the North, where I'm from, unfortunately, has a quite big right flank. And 1 in 4 people voted xenophobic, voted against you. If you want to come to Europe, just remember there's 1 in 4 people who specifically hates you, right? and my wife. um, in Netherlands, they're late to the party. You first had a party called, sorry that I'm telling you all these details, but hey, now you know, all right? You had a party called Lijst Fortuin, from a man called Fortuin, who was anti-immigrant, but not really fascist. Then he get killed. Some anarchists killed him. And that kind of started this wave of indignation of the far right waking up. And the new party was the Party for Freedom, which is a very misleading name, but that's what they're called. Partij voor de Vrijheid, of a man called Geert Wilders, which is, they're racist. That's their thing. They're xenophobic, anti-immigrant, anti-Islam, anti-establishment party. Started in 2006, won immediately that elections, and got into government 2010. They were not the prime minister, they were not the party, but they were a coalition partner of the government. So they actually had power there. Then you have in United Kingdom, you had the United Kingdom Independence Party, or UKIP, by Nigel Farage. Have you ever heard of him? No. Look at me here teaching about Europe. Well, now you know. Their point was they wanted Brexit, right? They wanted to get rid of the socialist Europe and the immigrants and the Polish and the refugees and this regional nationalism, well, national nationalism, but within Europe regional. Started in the 90s and won 2010 and got what they wanted. They never got into government because that's extremely hard in the United Kingdom because of how their voting works. It's just like in US, it's a two-party system. It's a first past the post system. So if you get 30% everywhere, that means you have zero, right? You need to win over 50 to have anything. So they don't play a role in national politics, but they won. They got Brexit done. So that's part of it. So this is when it starts coming back, right, as an idea. And the next step is going to break through, as in actually gain power, or actually start making advances that are new. And this is since 2010 in Europe, it became much more aggressive. I told you in the Netherlands they won. They came back in Germany and in Austria in the 2010s. In Germany, you have a party called Alternative für Deutschland. You have to say it angry, right? Alternative für Deutschland. Or the Alternative for Germany. Sorry for that. I could even do it stronger. I have some paper. See. Alternative für Deutschland. So, anyway, they're the far right. They're the new. They're neo-Nazis. They're fascists. They're family members of ex-Nazis, etc. And I think they're 13% now. But if you break that down regionally, there's regions where they're bigger, where they're 30, 40%. And that's not that big, but it's Germany. So it's concerning, right? that they're back there. That shouldn't happen. Germany shouldn't have a far right. I thought we made laws about this and such, but they're back at it. Cannot trust them. We trust them World War II that they wouldn't come back, and they were. So don't trust them. And in Hungary, they actually won. They just won with a clear majority. In Hungary, you have the far right of Viktor Orban, who has the government for a while now, since 2010, 11 years in power. So, and it depends how you count it, right? There's other parties too. And then it came to this continent with Trump, the biggest events of the century, Trump winning the elections. Again, Americans are illiterate when it comes to political theory, so he's not classified as fascist or anything. He's just a Republican. But if you compare him to European movements, the European fascist movements clearly liked him, which tells you something, right? They clearly, like, posters of him, etc. Tells you about who he naturally associates with. And much more clear than Trump is Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro ticks all boxes of fascism, all of them, except war, because Brazil, I don't know who they would fight the war with, maybe Venezuela one day. But besides that, Bolsonaro is is the real deal when it comes to neo-fascism. Sexist, xenophobic, anti-labor, strongly nationalist, anti-science, anti-intellectual, hate for the weak. He has everything, right? He is not even trying to stop Corona. Explicitly, I hope you know this. Bolsonaro is now on trial for crimes against humanity for trying to not just do it wrong, trying to stop people from doing it right, trying to fire ministers who wanted to do measures, who want lockdowns, who want masks, who want vaccinations. Because, as he said in an interview, well, this is only going to kill the weak, right? We strong people will survive this. That is fascism directly. So it looks like he's been there for 10 years, but when I looked this up, it's 2019. I said, my God, it's only been 2 years of this man. So that's the farthest they've advanced on this continent. Of course, the question is, where do you draw the line, right? Do you consider Putin fascist? He would strongly disagree, and most Russians would strongly disagree. But he has a lot of these elements too. You have other movements who were very different and which normally you would call conservative, like Erdogan in Turkey, but that might be turning towards this or that have a similar energy to it. So then the question is, where do you draw the line, and then what do you consider far right? It becomes much bigger. Do you have any thoughts on this or any questions? Because I'm done talking.
My only thought is that it's so weird that people think that communism is similar to neo-fascism. Like, I don't see any coincidence. Like, because, like, for example, it's supposed in theory that the different systems of oppression will be abolished when you achieve communism. But neo-fascism only refers, this reject to the weak and sexism, xenophobia. So, like, I don't get it actually. Maybe I do, but I don't.
Well, you could read these authors, right? There's some that I even saw someone, like he identified what fascism is. And he claimed that fascism started with Rousseau, which when I read, I was like, what? Because Rousseau is the guy who brought democracy. At least that's how I teach him. That's what I understand from Rousseau. It's the guy who brought democracy back. But he labeled him as the anti-democrat, which is very weird because, there was this whole thing. So people could vote. So you can twist everything, right? And it's partly, again, if you've stressed this authoritarian nature of socialism and you compare it to the Stalinist movement, there are parallels. Stalin was very nationalist, unlike Trotsky. He had no interest in the world, he only had interest in Russia. Although he wasn't Russian, he was Georgian, but just like Hitler was not German either. But so they have some things in common. They were violent, they were oppressive. And if you focus on that, and if you reduce communism to Stalin, you can see the parallels. Except that Stalin, even if he was clearly a communist in his own mind. He was thinking about class warfare and this and that. So in that time, in the 40s, yeah, there were similarities, but they're not theoretical similarities. They're similarities in practice. In theory, they're trying to do opposite things. Most importantly, fascism protects the capitalist class. But that's a very common thesis, is the totalitarian thesis that draws this parallel. Any things you want to say or questions you have? I know I should have given you some more information at the end, but this is where I got. It was bedtime. At some time, it's bedtime.
I think it was good.
Okay.
I have another question, but, like, for example,
I love this meme. Yes.
Frena, Frena just hates the poor, or are they actually kinda fascist?
Didn't one of you write your essay about that? Diego, didn't you do that last semester?
Yes, it was me.
You could maybe try to answer this question and make the case because you made that case, right?
Uh, I think they are the both facts are connected. They hate the poor, and that's why they have uh, fascist ideas.
But why do you call them fascist? Sophia wants to know that.
Okay, well, because first of all, they start from the fact that there's a foreign intervention in the country, especially from Central America countries. So, from that point, they start with this xenophobic rhetoric, and then now get into a nationalist uh, like point of view. So, considering the fact that they are xenophobic with this this idea that we are being intervened by some communist people,
Was it Nicaragua, right?
yeah,
Uh,
and that well they are also undemocratic. The by considering that they want to take out a government that was legitimately chosen by the people, they also are undemocratic. And also that we taking this fact, they also hate the poor because they consider that people who vote from this government are, uh, I will say, stupid because they have less education because they are from lower classes.
mhm. There's some parallels, right? I think Frena is a mess, but no, but they just are. So it's not very clear what they are, besides what they pretend to be, right? Anti-AMLO, as their name spells out. But they they have a lot of elements of it. They're definitely irrational. At least the leader is, um, wildly so. So they're the close to the far right you would have in Mexico, yes. But we don't really have this, right? Because we don't have a lot of immigrants. What do you have in Mexico? You have people like Bronco and Bronco 2 who use regionalism and general machismo and you know this type of style of more foreign nationalism. And Bronco himself came quite close at some moments. We start talking about chopping hands and such, but I think that's more them experimenting with this style of politics, experimenting with what they see with Trump and trying to apply it here. Um, I don't I don't think that Samuel has some kind of altar to the Nazis in his basement. Um, I don't think it's that. I think it's more taking pages out of the book of nationalism and trying to use that. And Frena is the closest we have to a far right. Um, and they are it, but they're not the party. I wish they were. It would be awesome. Maybe one of you could convince them. Um, any other questions or things you want to say?
I have a question. Like, I've been thinking that this rhetoric that has been used by not only the actual candidates, not only uh, Larrazábal and Samuel, of saying that a Nuevo León se le respeta, or that, as you said before, that we are being robbed by the state from the center of the
Mm-hmm.
country. I think that are some fascist ideas because even if they are not like, if they don't mean them, and they are just using them to appeal the norteños character. Uh, for
Mm-hmm.
me, that's kind of fascist rhetoric, like separating Nuevo León from the rest of the country.
Well, I don't know. That in itself doesn't make it fair. It makes a nationalist. Um, because fascism, well, I hate to argue for them, but fascism is not per definition. Remember, I made the distinction between small and large nationalism. Fascism is not by definition small nationalism. In the Italy's case and German's case, it was about uniting a bigger thing. It was about not separating, but conquering stuff. So separation is not necessarily fascist, but it's definitely a nationalist thing, yes. And there are parallels, although I don't think they're the same. It's more learning from, because if fascism is this transhistorical appeal or energy almost, it's something you can tap into. Um, the problem here is when if you're not actually a nationalist, but you use it. Trump, I think, is a good example of this. Or if you're not actually a populist because you're a billionaire and you don't actually know, but you just pretend, you can, since you don't understand your own movement, you can create things that you cannot control. You saw this with Trump and the riots, right? Like rich people were like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if they would riot? And then they did it, and then people died. They were like, oh, we didn't mean it like that. Um, and the same with nationalism. Once you awaken these things in people, nationalism doesn't go away unless people die of old age. Like once you awaken these identities in people, this is not one of the big misunderstandings is that populism is a temporal thing, that it's a trend. It's not true. Once you awaken identities in people, they will leave a mark, even if they forget about it. Once it's awakened, it's there. So it can be very dangerous for conservatives and neoliberals to play with nationalism if they don't mean it, because they can't put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak, once they did it. You saw it with United Kingdom. They thought, oh, we're going to go against Europe and have this referendum for independence, and we're going to lose that referendum, right? But we're going to win the elections on it. And then they won the referendum against their will, and then, damn, we have to now separate. It's going to cost our economy. You don't awaken this if you don't mean it. It's one of the warnings I have. If you want to use nationalist policies, either you are a nationalist or you don't do it, because it will quickly get out of your hands. And on that note, on that warning, I will stop talking and let you go. Unless, did any of you read my essays, or did I bother you with these questions? I'm just always trying to get some feedback. Or not.
I actually didn't.
I did.
It's okay. I'll forgive you for now. I'll still read yours. See how generous I am. Mr. Diego, you did. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I don't remember that like specific things, but I like it because if you remember, I was also telling in the class something like that of criticizing these people that don't see the left nature of this government.
Okay.
So yeah, I really like it. Like it's a nice critique to these people, and also when do I see it? Yeah, I saw. I don't know if it was the same day or the next day that this guy Alfredo Lecona then put it like in Twitter like this kind of pictoline images, but it wasn't pictoline of the characteristics of a fascist government, and he put like this government accomplish all the characteristics of fascist government. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think it was the same day you post the essay, so it was interesting for me the relation with those two things.
I got a lot of reposts from Tias who were like, "I told you they were socialists," but like from the right. So it was interesting. All right, good. I'm going to stop this time for real, and I'll see you Wednesday when we discuss more nationalism. Take care. Wednesday, Thursday,
Okay,
even better.
Victor. Have a nice
Goodbye,
day.
everyone.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good
See you.
future.
Yep.